The chandeliers of the Grand Allison Hotel in Seoul blazed like captured stars, throwing warm light over a sea of tailored suits and diamond-studded gowns. Tonight was the International Luxury Development Charity Gala, the kind of night where fortunes were made with a handshake and reputations were quietly destroyed with a whisper. Government officials mingled with celebrities. Billionaires traded pleasantries, while their assistants traded information. And at the center of it all, expected by everyone, was Kang Tae-jun. He arrived the way he always did, without hurry, without needing to prove anything, because everyone in that room had already decided he was the most important man present. Korea's youngest billionaire, CEO, the man whose corporation was rumored to be seconds away from securing the largest luxury resort contract in a decade. Men bowed their heads slightly when he passed. Women watched him from behind champagne flutes. He accepted it all with the same practiced, distant smile he'd worn for 4 years. He didn't smile with his eyes anymore. Nobody seemed to notice. Or if they did, nobody dared to say it. "Chairman Kang," an old business partner said, clasping his hand. "Tonight is yours. Everyone knows it." "We'll see," Tae-jun replied smoothly, though privately he already believed it too. He took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and let his gaze drift lazily across the ballroom, the way a king surveys a kingdom he's grown bored of ruling. Nothing here surprised him anymore. Nothing here moved him. And then the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. Conversation didn't fade gradually. It died all at once, like a held breath. Heads turned. String music faltered for half a second before the quartet caught themselves and kept playing. Softer now, as if even the musicians understood something significant was happening. A woman stepped through the doorway. She wore a deep red gown, the fabric so rich it seemed to drink in the chandelier light and give it back doubled, a color that did not ask to be noticed, and yet made it impossible to look away. She did not rush. She did not scan the room nervously the way newcomers often did, searching for someone familiar to cling to. She walked like she belonged there, like she always had. Beside her, holding her hand, was a little boy. He couldn't have been older than 3, dressed in a small tailored tuxedo that fit him with an almost comical precision. His shoes shined, his dark curls neatly combed. He looked up at the chandeliers with open wonder and let out a soft, delighted laugh, tugging his mother's hand as if to ask if she could see how beautiful it all was, too. Tae-jun looked toward the entrance, the way he'd looked toward 100 entrances that night, casually, indifferently. His smile vanished. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It didn't shatter loudly. It was almost polite about it. A soft, crystalline crash, swallowed by the string music and the murmur of 200 conversations. But for Tae-jun, the sound seemed to detonate inside his skull. Because the boy had his eyes, his exact eyes, the same dark, sharp shape that Tae-jun saw every morning in the mirror. The boy had his smile, too. That same small dimple on the left side that Tae-jun's own mother used to say made him her little troublemaker. And his jaw, still soft with baby fat, already hinted at the same strong line Tae-jun had inherited from his father. It was like looking at a photograph of himself at 3 years old. Except this child was walking beside a woman Tae-jun hadn't seen in 4 years. A woman he had personally destroyed in front of half the people currently standing in this very room. Zuri. His knees went weak. His hand, now empty of the glass, trembled at his side. Somewhere behind him, an assistant murmured, "Sir? Sir, are you all right?" But Tae-jun couldn't answer. He couldn't move. He could only stare, his mind screaming one impossible, undeniable truth. That's my son. 4 years earlier, none of this would have seemed possible. Zuri Adeyemi had been a brilliant Nigerian architect, sent to Seoul as part of an international team designing a luxury hotel complex that would later become one of Tae-jun's crowning achievements. She was elegant without trying to be, sharp-minded, unshakably confident. The kind of woman who walked into rooms full of powerful men and made them realize, within minutes, that she was the smartest person there. Tae-jun had noticed her long before he admitted it to himself. He noticed the way she defended her design choices without raising her voice, the way she remembered the names of every junior architect on her team, even the interns, the way she looked at him, not with the starstruck admiration he was used to, but with simple, direct respect, as though his wealth meant nothing to her and his character meant everything. "You're staring, Chairman Kang," she'd told him once, not even looking up from her blueprints. "I'm evaluating your work," he'd replied. "No," she said, finally meeting his eyes with a small, knowing smile. "You're staring." He hadn't been able to argue. Their relationship grew slowly, deliberately, the way real things tend to. Late nights reviewing architectural plans turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long phone calls that stretched past midnight. And somewhere in the middle of it, Tae-jun, a man who had built an empire out of control and precision, fell hopelessly, uncontrollably in love. His family did not approve. "She's foreign," his mother said. The word dropped like a verdict. "She has no family name here, no connections. What does she bring to this family besides scandal?" "She brings herself," Tae-jun had answered, and for once in his life, he meant it more than he meant any business deal he'd ever closed. He married her anyway, against the quiet fury of his parents, against the murmurs of executives who called it reckless, against a society that had never seen a Korean CEO of his caliber marry an African woman and dare to call it a love match rather than a scandal. For a while, for nearly 2 years, it was enough. They were happy. Truly, uncomplicatedly happy, in a way Tae-jun hadn't known he was capable of. Then the cracks began. Min Seo, his former fiancée, the woman his parents had always wanted him to marry, returned to Seoul after a long stay abroad, and she did not return quietly. She reinserted herself into his family's social circles, into charity boards, into boardroom dinners, always positioned just close enough to remind everyone what could have been. "She's only after the company," Tae-jun's mother said constantly. "Never about Min Seo, always about Zuri. Foreign women marry into money because they can't build their own." Executives began whispering the same thing in different words. Zuri, who had spent years earning her own reputation as an architect, was reduced in their conversations to a gold digger, an opportunist, a woman who'd seduced her way into Korea's elite. And then the evidence began to appear. It started small, a missing internal document tied to a construction budget. Then a financial record that didn't match the numbers Zuri had submitted for her firm's portion of a project. Then, most damning of all, security footage, edited, though no one seemed to question that at the time, appearing to show Zuri meeting privately with a rival construction magnate, exchanging what looked like sealed documents. "It's not what it looks like," Zuri told him, her voice steady despite the panic underneath it. "Tae-jun, look at me. I would never betray you. I would never betray this company." He wanted to believe her. God, some small part of him did believe her. But the evidence kept mounting, piece by piece, whisper by whisper, until the version of reality being fed to him by his parents, his executives, and Min Seo's carefully placed comments became louder than his own wife's voice. Instead of sitting her down, instead of investigating properly, quietly, the way a man who truly trusted his wife would have, instead of giving her the benefit of 4 years of marriage and genuine love, he believed everyone else. The birthday gala should have been a celebration. Zuri's 30th birthday, hosted as a charity event for underprivileged architecture students, filled with the same glittering crowd that filled every important event in their circle. She'd spent weeks planning it, not for herself, but for the scholarship fund it would support. She wore ivory that night, Tae-jun remembered. Not red, not yet, that would come 4 years later. And she had looked luminous, hopeful, unaware that the night was about to become the worst of her life. Taejun stood before the room, glass in hand, and instead of the toast everyone expected, a toast to his wife, to her brilliance, her kindness, her 3 decades of life, he set the glass down. "I've spent the last several weeks reviewing certain matters," he began, his voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom, "regarding my wife's conduct." Zuri's smile faltered. "Taejun, financial discrepancies, confidential documents shared with competitors, evidence that my wife has been working against the interests of this family and this company for months." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Zuri stood frozen, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. "That's not true," she said, her voice cracking despite her effort to remain composed. "Whatever you've seen, whatever anyone has told you, it's fabricated. Taejun, please, we can talk about this privately." There's nothing left to discuss. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded set of papers, laying them on the table in front of her like a judge delivering a sentence. Divorce papers. Prepared. Signed on his end already. "You never belonged in my world, Zuri. I should have listened to everyone who told me that from the beginning." The room was utterly silent. 200 guests, and not one of them said a word in her defense. Not one of them stepped forward to ask a single question about the evidence being used to destroy a woman in front of her own birthday cake. Zuri looked at her husband, the man she had built a life with, the man she had genuinely loved despite every obstacle his family threw between them, and she saw nothing there but cold, absolute certainty. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, not yet, not where they could see her. She picked up the pen with a hand that barely shook, and she signed. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her ivory gown, and walked out of the ballroom without looking back, her heels echoing off marble floors in a room full of people who had applauded her arrival an hour earlier. 3 days later, she discovered she was pregnant. She sat in her apartment, already smaller, already emptier, since she'd moved out of the Kang estate within 24 hours of the divorce, staring at the test in her trembling hands, and for one brief, foolish moment, hope flared in her chest. He would want to know. Surely, whatever had gone wrong between them, whatever lies had poisoned his mind against her, a child would change something. A child was proof of everything real that had existed between them. She went to his office the next morning, rehearsing the words in her head the entire elevator ride up. "Taejun, I'm pregnant. Taejun, we're having a baby. Taejun, please, just listen to me for 5 minutes." She never got the chance to say any of it. Standing outside his office door, her hand raised to knock, she heard his voice through the gap. Calm, businesslike, addressing his lawyer on a call. "Just finalize everything as quickly as possible," he was saying. "I want this over with. Once the divorce is finalized, I'll never have to see her again." Zuri's hand froze in midair. She stood there for a long moment, the pregnancy test still tucked inside her purse, the words she'd rehearsed dying in her throat one by one. "I'll never have to see her again." She lowered her hand slowly. She didn't knock. She turned, walked back to the elevator, and by the time the doors closed in front of her, she had already made her decision. She would not tell him. She would not hand him one more piece of her to reject. One more part of herself he could add to the list of things he no longer wanted. Within 2 weeks, she had packed what remained of her life in Seoul into 4 suitcases and boarded a flight back to Lagos, carrying a secret that would grow inside her for the next 7 months. Life in Lagos was not gentle to her. She had left Nigeria years earlier full of ambition, and she returned with a fraction of her savings, a broken heart, and a child on the way. Her parents took her in without judgment, though she saw the worry etched permanently into her mother's face every time she looked at her daughter's growing belly. "Does he know?" her mother asked once, gently, during the 7th month. "No," Zuri said, "and he never will." The early years were brutal in the way only single motherhood truly understands. Sleepless nights blurred into exhausted mornings. She freelanced architectural consultations from her childhood bedroom with a baby monitor propped beside her laptop, taking whatever contracts she could find while raising a son largely alone, watching every naira stretch thinner than it should. But Zuri Adeyemi did not know how to stay broken. She poured every ounce of pain, every sleepless night, every moment of humiliation from that ballroom into her work. She began designing sustainable luxury developments, a niche few architects in West Africa had fully explored, combining traditional materials with modern luxury in a way that soon caught international attention. What began as a one-woman consultancy grew, slowly and then rapidly, into Adeyemi Sustainable Designs, a firm that within 4 years would be fielding bids from governments and billionaires across 3 continents. Meanwhile, her son grew into a bright, curious little boy. She named him Ethan, a name with no ties to Korea, no ties to the man who didn't know he existed, a fresh name for a fresh start. He had her quiet confidence, and, though she rarely allowed herself to dwell on it, his father's exact eyes. "Mommy," Ethan asked one evening, barely 3 years old, looking up from his coloring book with the directness only small children possess. "Why don't I have a daddy like Amara does?" Zuri knelt beside him, brushing a curl from his forehead, choosing her words as carefully as she always did. "You have a father, sweetheart," she said gently. "He just doesn't know you exist yet." Ethan considered this with the serious concentration of a child working through a difficult puzzle. "Will he know one day?" "Maybe," Zuri said, and something in her chest tightened at the word. One day, maybe. Back in Korea, Taijun's empire only grew larger. New acquisitions, new developments, new contracts signed in cities across Asia and Europe. By every external measure, Kang Taijun was more successful, more powerful, more untouchable than he had ever been. And he had never felt emptier. He never remarried. His mother pushed Min Seo toward him at every family gathering for the first year after the divorce. But something in him had gone cold to the idea of marriage entirely. He buried himself in work instead. 18-hour days, international flights, board meetings that stretched past midnight. Anything to avoid the silence of his enormous, empty penthouse at the end of the day. He told himself over and over, in the quiet moments he couldn't outrun, that he'd done the right thing, that the evidence had been clear, that any reasonable man would have made the same decision. But some nights, staring out at the Seoul skyline from his floor-to-ceiling windows, he would remember the way Zuri used to laugh, a real laugh, unguarded, nothing like the careful smiles of every woman his mother had introduced him to since. And something in his chest would ache in a way that no amount of success could ever quite silence. He never once let himself consider that he might have been wrong, until the ballroom doors opened, and his entire understanding of the last 4 years shattered along with that champagne glass. Now, standing frozen in the middle of the gala, Taijun watched Zuri move through the crowd with the same quiet confidence she'd always carried, except now it was sharper, more assured, tempered by 4 years of building something entirely her own. Every conversation in the ballroom had turned to hushed murmurs. "Is that? I heard her firm won the Busan contract. Wait, the Adeyemi bid beat Kang Group's proposal?" Taejun's stomach dropped as the pieces clicked into place. He hadn't just lost the contract everyone assumed was his tonight. He'd lost it to her. He forced his legs to move, weaving through the crowd, ignoring the stares, ignoring his own assistant calling his name in confusion behind him. He needed to get closer. He needed to see the boy's face up close, needed to confirm what some desperate, terrified part of him already knew with absolute certainty. Zuri saw him approaching. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She simply straightened her shoulders and waited, one hand resting protectively, naturally, on Ethan's small shoulder. "Zuri," Taejun said, his voice hoarse in a way he barely recognized. "Chairman Kang," she replied, cool and professional, using his formal title as though they'd never shared a bed, a home, 4 years of marriage. Congratulations on tonight's event. I hear it's been very successful for everyone but your corporation. The words should have stung with sarcasm, but her tone carried none. Just fact, delivered plainly, the way she'd once presented blueprints to skeptical investors. Tae-jun barely heard her. His eyes had already dropped to the small boy standing beside her, staring up at him now with open, unguarded curiosity. "Zuri," he said again, quieter this time, almost pleading. "Who is this?" Before she could answer, Ethan tilted his head, studying Tae-jun's face with the same unfiltered directness his mother often displayed, and asked the question that would detonate everything. "Daddy?" The word hung in the air like a gunshot. The nearby guests, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, stopped pretending entirely. Someone gasped audibly. A phone camera lifted somewhere in the crowd, then several more. Tae-jun's knees nearly buckled. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to the boy's eye level, his hands trembling as he studied every detail of that small face. The eyes, the dimple, the shape of his jaw that mirrored photographs of Tae-jun himself at that exact age. "What's your name?" Tae-jun asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan," the boy said proudly. "Ethan Adeyemi." Adeyemi, not Kang, a name that had never once included him. Tae-jun looked up at Zuri, his eyes wet, his composure, the composure of a man who'd built and controlled an empire for 4 years, completely gone. "Is he?" He couldn't even finish the sentence. "Not here," Zuri said quietly, and for the first time, a crack showed in her own careful armor. "Not like this." DNA results came back 9 days later, though by then, nobody who had seen Ethan's face beside Tae-jun's needed a laboratory to confirm what was already obvious. Tae-jun used every resource his company possessed to unravel the truth he should have investigated 4 years earlier. What he found made him physically sick. The missing documents, the falsified financial records, the doctored security footage. All of it had been orchestrated by Min Seo, working in coordination with 2 senior executives who'd been quietly paid to look the other way. All of it built on his parents' willingness to believe any story that removed Zuri from the family. "We did it for you," his mother said, when he confronted her, utterly unrepentant. "She was never right for this family. You have a son now who deserves a proper Korean upbringing. Don't you see? Everything worked out. Everything worked out." Tae-jun's voice cracked with a fury his mother had never heard from him before. "I missed 4 years of my son's life. I destroyed the mother of my child in front of 200 people because of lies you helped create." He didn't scream. He didn't need to. The quiet, shattered rage in his voice was more terrifying than any outburst could have been. He called an emergency press conference within the week, not to protect his company's reputation, but to dismantle it publicly if that's what the truth required. Standing before the same elite society that had watched Zuri's humiliation without objection 4 years earlier, Tae-jun laid out every piece of fabricated evidence, every falsified document, every name involved in the conspiracy that had destroyed his marriage. "My wife did nothing wrong," he said, his voice carrying across a silent room. "I failed her. I chose to believe strangers over 4 years of marriage to a woman who never once gave me reason to doubt her. That failure cost me my son's first 4 years of life, and no apology can return that time to either of us. But I owe her, and everyone in this room who watched her walk out that night without a single voice raised in her defense. The truth." He turned, found Zuri standing quietly near the back of the room, and for the first time in 4 years, he said the words he should have said long before any of this began. "I'm sorry. Not because I expect forgiveness, only because you deserve to hear it. Publicly. The same way you were publicly wronged." Zuri said nothing. She simply nodded once, her expression unreadable, and walked out. Not in anger this time. but with the same quiet dignity she'd carried through every version of this story since the beginning. The months that followed were slow, careful, deliberate. Tae-jun did not push. He'd learned, finally, painfully, what happens when a person forces a version of the truth onto someone rather than earning it patiently. He requested visits, small ones at first. An afternoon at the park, supervised by Zuri, who watched from a nearby bench with careful, guarded eyes. He learned Ethan's favorite foods, his favorite cartoons, the specific way he liked his shoelaces double-knotted, because single knots always come undone at the worst time, Daddy. Daddy. It took months before Ethan used the word comfortably, without the small, hesitant pause that used to precede it. Tae-jun cherished every single instance, storing each one like a man collecting something precious he knew he didn't fully deserve. "You're doing better than I expected," Zuri told him one afternoon, watching him push Ethan on a swing set, laughing at something the boy had said. "I don't deserve credit for doing what I should have been doing for years," Tae-jun replied quietly. Zuri studied him for a long moment. "No," she agreed. "But you're doing it now. That matters too." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Not in the romantic sense the old version of Tae-jun might have hoped for. But it was something. A fragile, honest foundation neither of them dared to rush. One afternoon, months into this slow rebuilding, Ethan looked between his parents, with the simple directness only children possess, and asked the question that had been quietly hovering over every visit, every dinner, every careful interaction since the gala. "Dad," he said, "are you coming home with us?" The silence that followed felt endless. Tae-jun looked at Zuri, searching her face for some sign of what she wanted him to say, some indication of what the honest answer should be. She held his gaze steadily, and in her eyes, he saw not an invitation back into the life they'd once had, but something calmer, more grounded, an offer of something entirely new. She knelt down beside Ethan, taking his small hands in hers. "We're already home, sweetheart," she said gently. "Right here. All three of us together, just like this." Ethan considered this for a moment, then nodded, satisfied in the uncomplicated way only children can be, before running off toward the swings again, already forgetting the weight of the question he'd just asked. Tae-jun watched him go, tears he didn't bother hiding slipping down his face. "I understand," he said quietly to Zuri, though the words cost him something. "Some things can't be undone. I don't get a second chance at us." "No," Zuri agreed softly, without cruelty, only honesty. "But you get every chance at being his father. That's not a consolation prize, Tae-jun. That's its own gift, if you choose to treat it that way." He nodded, wiping his face, watching his son laugh in the afternoon sun. Some mistakes, he had learned, could never be undone. Love did not always get a second chance, but fatherhood could. Years passed. Ethan grew from a curious toddler into a thoughtful, confident young boy, moving between two countries, two households, two parents who had chosen, deliberately, painstakingly, to build something functional and kind out of the wreckage of what had once been a marriage. At his elementary school graduation, held in a small auditorium decorated with handmade banners and paper streamers, Zuri sat in the front row, her chest tight with the particular pride only a mother who has built everything from nothing can understand. A respectful distance away, but close enough to be unmistakably present, sat Tae-jun. Not as her husband, not as a man hoping to win back what he'd lost, but as Ethan's father, fully and unmistakably, in every sense that mattered now. When Ethan's name was called, and he crossed the small stage to accept his certificate, he didn't hesitate. He ran straight down the aisle toward both of them, grabbing one parent's hand in each of his own, grinning up at them with the pure, uncomplicated joy of a child who had never once had to choose between the two people he loved most. Zuri and Tai Jun looked at each other over their son's head, not as lovers reunited, not as a fractured marriage magically repaired, but as two adults who had chosen, deliberately and every single day since, to put their child above the pain of everything that had come before. They smiled, a real smile, the kind neither of them had shared in years. Then, together, the three of them walked out of the auditorium into the bright afternoon light, a family redefined not by reconciliation, but by respect. Proof that forgiveness didn't always require a romantic ending to be real, and that sometimes the most powerful love story isn't about two people finding their way back to each other. It's about two people finding their way, together, towards someone they both love more than they ever loved being right. If this story moved you, don't scroll past without letting us know. Drop a comment below and tell us which moment hit you hardest. Was it the gala reunion, the truth finally coming out, or that final graduation scene? Hit that like button if you believe second chances at fatherhood matter just as much as second chances at love, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the next story like this one. There are so many more journeys of heartbreak, truth, and redemption waiting for you. See you in the next story.